Joined now by Amy Hawkins. I've followed her on social media for quite some time. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be with the Dave Bondy.
Thank you. You have your hands in a lot of different things, but I connect it with you when it comes to your passion for law enforcement. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about the group you're with now, what you do now to help,
Okay.
further the positivity with law enforcement in Michigan.
Thank you for that. And I will say this, that I am just a citizen.
Okay.
So hopefully that encourages some of your listeners that we don't have to be in law enforcement to really start to take a stand. My journey started, gosh, like when I was a kid, I was so fortunate to be raised in a family that understands freedom and that nothing is guaranteed. My dad was, I'm proud to say, was a Vietnam, I was serving in Vietnam, and both grandpas in World War II. And so I think that was just kind of the fabric of built into me. But in 2018, if everybody remembers, law enforcement, we think law enforcement attacks now are bad, but it was bad back then. And I just couldn't handle it anymore. I had been involved in the political arena for quite a while, worked with grassroots, and I'm also a doer. So I'm like, if there's a problem, let's try to solve it. And so I reached out to my friend, Sheriff Mike Bouchard, our Oakland County Sheriff, and I just said, what can I do? And what started was, he basically said, to me, this was like a dream of a law enforcement's heart, right? For them to say, I wish. And they said, I wish that Police Week was known like Memorial Day. And I'm like, what's Police Week? Well, you and I know, like, it has an amazing background story to it. But basically from that launched, I decided with a colleague, we decided to start a nonprofit, and people can visit it, check it out, policeweekmichigan.com. It's a 501c3, and the purpose of it is really just to, like, Dave, you and I've talked, I really truly believe the majority of America is pro law enforcement, but what we have become so good at is being silent. And so this project, it's again a 501c3 nonpartisan, a nonprofit group. We are volunteers doing this. That the
I got the
purpose
website.
is,
Is
yeah,
that the
thank
website?
you.
Okay, that's it.
Yep, that's perfect. The purpose is just to start to inspire citizens. We've got to speak up, stand up, and show up that we are with law enforcement during Police Week, which is in May every year, but really every week of the year. So we're doing everything from even just nudging legislators to do resolutions in the State House and Senate for Police Week, encouraging people to pass resolutions in their local community, to get school children to do pictures and to do meals for officers. It's been amazing, but really I believe that we're at the tip of the iceberg of what we could be accomplishing.
Yeah, and even though it says Police Week, it's all police all the time. That's just the name
Really?
of the group. Yeah, is you're saying.
Yeah, it is. We just kind of launched from that. And really that is, let's make sure we don't forget that week. That is a hallowed week for your viewers that are new to it. Democrat President JFK in 1962 basically drew a line in the sand, and he said, listen, the 15th of every May, I want to be Peace Officers Memorial Day. And that's the time for us to honor the men and women that have fallen behind the badge in the line of duty. And then what he did is he extended the days outside of that to say, let's make this Police Week. And so this has been going on for 62 years in our nation.
Wow.
And the biggest thing is, like, law enforcement, I guarantee your listeners that if they go up to an officer and say, hey, happy Police Week, or thank you, we know this is Police Week, thank you for being, doing what you do, officers will be shocked, because the standard is that citizens don't know about it. And really, it's just so fitting. I believe strongly too that law enforcement have our backs every hour of the day, every day of the week, every week of the year. It is only fitting that law enforcement know that we have their backs every week of the year. And I think too, Dave, like, people have become so good at being silent. We assume that everybody knows what we feel. And we get distracted with what's going on the national, and we are good about ranting, but we've got to be good about speaking up with a positive.
Yeah, and I talk about law enforcement. I've been in the media for 25 years. I primarily covered crime and courts, and I'm friends with a lot of police officers growing up as well. And some people say, "Oh, police officers," and I'm like, there's bad officers, there's bad dentists, there's bad lawyers. Every profession has bad ones. But in my dealings, almost 99.9%, they're amazing people who just really, they're like us. They have families. They want to protect their communities. So anyone watching this who is, saying anything negative, police. Yeah, there are bad ones. And
Mhm.
the good ones that I've learned, the good ones, they don't want the bad ones around.
Mm-mm. No. And they
Yeah.
actually want you to tell them too. I would say that like to your listeners, if you have a bad experience with law enforcement, and if you for some reason feel like you can't trust your department, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to a next door county. Go in with respect, go in with like whatever the situation was, approach them. They, like you said, they are just humans too. And they really do. This is what I've learned. And I'm sure you've seen too, Dave. Men and women that get into law enforcement, they don't get into it because of the money, because
No.
of the fame, because of the grants, like, whatever. It is really, truly because they love their community and they want to help. And that's always, to me, like as a Christian, even, I have made the comparison to even my walk with Christ, like just for me personally as a Christian, because when I think about that, men and women every day, they put on the badge knowing that they're walking out that door and they may not walk back. It takes my breath away to think that men and women sign up for this profession to run into danger just so that I can be safe. And that is profound.
I would encourage everyone, I don't know if departments do it, but allow people to do a ride along or at least hang out for it.
1000%.
Because when I started in journalism when I was 20, and my first ride along, I learned so much about what they do. I spent a whole day. So I would encourage people to just get to know an officer, do a ride along if you can. It's so eye-opening of what they have to deal with.
And I'm glad you said that too, because I don't know about your psyche, but I think my psyche is, well, one, if I get pulled over by a police officer because I'm speeding, I'm all nervous. And I think law enforcement, as they should in a way, right? There's a holy respect for them. But I think what we as communities have to remember is they are so approachable and they yearn to be invited into our space. And so whether it's a business that's having a community potluck, whether it's a church that's doing like a back to school kickoff, they want to be invited to your table. And so I think we as even grateful citizens, like we have got to be better about multiplying that gratitude. And we can no longer assume that someone else is going to carry the banner for them. And so what I mean by that is if you're a teacher, take initiative and invite those police officers to meet with your students. Do notes for the officer. Like there's so many ways that we can be creative to let officers know they're not alone.
And for example, what happened in Oakland County, I'll bring the picture up on the screen. This brought my wife to tears. I mean, anyone who has seen what happened, and if you're in Michigan, I'm assuming about this, about Deputy Bradley Reckling. His wife, they were expecting a child, and he was gunned down, I believe, in Detroit, just doing his job. And I mean, this I would hope brings it home to people that he's doing his job and randomly just shot and killed, and it feels like it's happening so much. Maybe it's because we're so connected in the media now, but let me bring this up on the screen. This is so far, we've had 71 deaths this year with law enforcement, 24 by gunfire, 14 by crash. I mean, it's too many. It just seems like it's happening all the time. And I can say it because I'm seeing it now. Early reports of a shooting in Hillsdale County of a law enforcement officer shot
today.
Yeah, today, just like within the last several hours. Are we getting, is there not I don't know what's going on? Is there a lack of respect? Because I would think, how can someone randomly open fire on an officer or a deputy? That just, to me, in my upbringing and belief, doesn't make any sense. Or is there just what's going on in society? I mean,
I think it's almost, I think it's a good question. In a way, I would make the argument, I think it's almost, it's a strange, awkward nexus of many things, where you take the breakdown of the family, you take they're so consumed. I'm not saying it's just one of these. I think it's kind of a mixture of things. You take, people are so consumed with their screens, right? They figured out they don't have to have that person-to-person connection. You've got people that are consumed with addictions. You've got people that are desperate in economy times. You've got multiple scenarios. And Dave, I think the question becomes for people like you and me is to say, okay, one, let's acknowledge the problem, but how do we move forward with solutions? And I think for people like you and me, it's one, having these conversations. And it's saying, let's bring it out into the open. Let's talk about it. Awful, tragic death that would happen with Detective Reckling, and it should not happen again. Like, we need to honor that life. But then we need to look at, how do we make sure this doesn't happen in the future? And one of the things I think of is, like, the story as I heard it is Detective Reckling, he had only recently been on this auto theft unit, and this car had only been stolen like a few hours prior. And evidently Detective Reckling was like the best of the best.
Yeah,
Like,
I
he
heard.
would like find a detail. I mean, he would go after it. And they found this car. And so it led him into Detroit. The car stopped. The individual got out, shot him in the head, neck, and torso. Who raised that child that decided that gun was okay? Now, I say all of this in a very broad statement, right? You and I know we're each responsible for our own choices. But to me, it hits home the point that we, as like parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, we have a responsibility to make sure those students, children, the next generation understands 99% of your officers are good men and women who will approach you with compassion.
Yeah.
And that even if they catch you with that car, 99% of them are going to treat you with humanity and dignity. And if you get captured, there is a road to redemption. And I think that has to become part of the narrative, that even, even if I don't have children. If I was living in Detroit and I had troubled children, I'm sure my kids run out the door. You have no clue what they're doing, right? And so all you can do is plant those right seeds. But I think we as community leaders, we need to start asking those questions to say, okay, kids, you get pulled over, or, there's this crisis. Don't run towards an officer with a gun. Stop and see what kind of hope they're gonna give you. So I think it's kind of multifaceted, but I think the biggest solution is, Dave, is like you and I not running away from the topic, but embracing it and starting to challenge people.
Yeah, and you're right. It is multifaceted. Mental health, the family breakdown, and the more discussion, the better, and not hiding away from it. And also the media, entertainment, whatever it might be, trying to assist with that effort.
Right.
The media, there are great journalists out there, great people, but many times the entertainment industry, so forth, sometimes paints law enforcement in a negative light, unfairly, sometimes in the media as well. I think we need to give, them a fair shake. Back in the day, I told you earlier, when I was a 6-year-old, I was riding my little police car. I wanted to be a police officer.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's still happening. My little guy, he says he wants to,
right.
when you're a little kid, but it just seems I'm wrong.
Right.
But it just feels like the way police officers, law enforcement are portrayed sometimes in the entertainment and media is not like it used to be.
I think there's room for people like you and me too to press back on it, when we see those negatives, to say, even, wow, I'm really sorry you've had a bad experience, but let's acknowledge the majority of them. And I think that's, hopefully with even our group, like Police Week Michigan, just to start to give some tools into people's hands to say, here's how you can speak up. Here's how you can push back. Because I think too, what we need to talk about the elephant in the room, that we are at a crisis point. That law enforcement, I couldn't blame you, Dave, if you told your kids, don't go into law enforcement, right? And we are in a crisis point too, in the sense that we all rely on law enforcement more than we even realize. It's almost like oxygen, right? If the room loses oxygen, we notice. We notice when we call 911 and it takes people 15 minutes to get there. We notice if we walk into a dangerous situation and there is no officer around. But what is happening is, not only are law enforcement demoralized, you have local governments that aren't supporting them like they should. Like, why is money going to DEI stuff or parks when it should be going to say, hey, officers, do you have the pension do you need, to keep your family safe? Why are we not making them a greater priority? Why are we not requiring media classes even to go through and to do simulators with law enforcement to say, this is what it's all about? Why are we not requiring high schoolers to take a tour of a prison to say, if you don't behave better, this could be your outcome? Why are we not, even as churches? This is one of my biggest beefs, Dave, is I feel like because the church has done such a great job of not getting involved in culture it has really left our teachers, it has left educators, it has left our law enforcement to have to pick up the pieces, right? If you have a family, a man and a woman having a marriage dispute, it's not the church community that's showing up at the door. It's the police officer saying, we just got a call from your neighbor. Is there abuse going on? And so we've had to rely on our law enforcement more, where they're having to be the counselor, the nanny, so I think the answer to all of this is, one, let's acknowledge the problem. Yeah. We cannot back away. We have to figure out, and you know what? Yeah, what I say today is not going to shake Joe Biden or anybody on the national level. But what I do today is going to make a difference with my local community. And does my local community know how important law enforcement is to us as a community? But if they don't get people showing, it's like you and I were talking about, Michigan has 83 counties, right? County commissioners. Guess who oversees your sheriff department budgets? The county commissioners. Guess how many people don't go to county commission meetings? Massive number of people. But if you were to get community members to start to go to county commissions and to start speaking up and saying, listen, I care about a lot of things, but please make sure law enforcement is a priority in your budget. Right?
Yeah,
that's what matters.
There is a lack of before I left the media or mainstream media, I talked to somewhere down in Genesee County, but they are having a hard time filling positions and finding officers and deputies, and that's not how it was back in the day. And many of them are like, no. And then in other cities across the country where they're making it very difficult for them to do their job, many officers are going to be like, I don't want to risk going to jail or doing that. So it kind of makes them more vulnerable. And it's sad because there's not as many, there's a lot of officers retiring, but there's not as many coming into the profession.
Right. Well, but then take it further too. It's all interrelated, right? So if you don't have law enforcement, you have higher crime. And who wants to move into a city where there's crime? And so then you get bad economy. Well, then what about if you don't have a good prosecutor? Law enforcement know that the prosecutor does not have their back. And so then if a law enforcement makes a mistake, as humans do, you don't have like the law that's like, that they're going to help you make it the best way through, right? Like the honesty. So it all intermingles. And what we have done as Americans is really embarrassing. We have basically put ourselves in a cocoon and said, it doesn't apply to me, therefore I don't want to do anything with it, leave me alone. When what's happening is now you and I are experiencing that trickle-down effect. And I think we are standing at a nexus where if leaders like you and me can really start to rally and inspire and garner more support and help people get organized, we really could bring about a positive trajectory. But if we just let this go by, you and I could wake up and with our families in 20 years, and law enforcement is a very small part of our universe.
Yeah, but a very important part. For for example, New York City or whatever it is, a lot of the officers, the prosecutors, dropping cases, letting people out who should be behind bars. If you're a police officer, if I was an officer, I would be thinking, why am I doing my job if they're just going to let these people out or give them no bond? Or, every situation is different, but there's been so many horrible situations where dangerous people have been let out, and the officer is probably thinking, what's going on here?
Right. Right. Well, and I think it comes back to, right, like you and I look at America, and obviously there's a lot of struggles with any group of people. There's always going to be struggles. And we look at what makes us beautiful. What makes us beautiful is the role of the citizen. Alexander, I always butcher his name. I forget how his name goes, but he was this famous, I think French leader that came over and toured America and started digging into what makes us great and looking at the townships, right? Like how unique we are. And it all ties back to the citizen, that this is a nation of, Abraham Lincoln said, of the people, by the people, for the people. And so in essence, we have the government that we want and that we will allow. And law enforcement and your judicial arena, that is a part of that government we will allow. And so if your listeners are like, man, I can see that law enforcement, not only for this moment, but for the next 100 years is important. What do I do? One, you start at your local. You go out on your front porch and you look around and you say, okay, who are the police force that if I were to call 911, they would come? Well, have your listeners ever walked into a police station to say, I'd like to just shake your hand and say, this is who I am. Thank you for what you do. Do you have volunteer opportunities? How could we help? I mean, are people rallying their churches to say, let's be praying? Are people rallying their businesses? I mean, this will break your heart. Like Oakland County, there were a couple scenarios recently where I was talking to law enforcement in a couple different counties. And I'm always curious, Dave, I'm not in the media like you are, but like I've got this inquisitive, I'm just curious, like how are people showing up? And in talking to one law enforcement in Oakland County, and there was a scenario, and I said, well, hey, have you had like a good response? Like if churches reached out with this crisis, this was before the death of this Detective Reckling. This was another scenario. And the top law enforcement in that department, I said, have you had churches reach out to support? He's like, not that I'm aware of.
Wow.
I had another situation where another tragedy of a law enforcement officer, and I asked someone from command staff, I'm like, well, hey, have you heard from businesses? Have you heard from churches? And they were basically like, we're the ones that have had to cover everything this week. They hadn't heard much from businesses. When it came to the elected officials showing up, that was like a drop in the bucket of people showing up. And the last thing I'll tell you, this will break your heart, but it might be something you and I can like help improve. There is a gathering that has been happening in Lansing for the last 30 years around Police Week. And it's this amazing memorial, Dave. It is profound. Like you would love bringing your children to it. I was able to go this year for the first time, but I had heard prior to this, they said, Amy, we don't usually get citizens that show up. And the elected legislators are not even good at showing up. So I'm going to like go on a tiny bit of a rant, but maybe you and I can help change this. I went to Lansing. I tried to get the word out to people. It is the most profound. It was at the state capitol. All these law enforcement, they walk in, they're all on the steps. You have this beautiful parade of motorcycles that roll in. I mean, it is like bagpipes, taps, profound. How many state house members do we have? 110. How many were there? 2.
Wow.
How many state senators did we know for sure were there? There's 38. There was 1. There was no governor. And this was profound to me because you take this scenario, they've been doing this for 30 years. These are families of those that have died. And you look around the grounds and it should be masses showing up. It should be, and I've heard people say, well, the legislators weren't in office. The session started the next day. To you and me as logical people, we would say, wow, we see what's going on in the nation. Law enforcement need to see the moral backing of their legislators. We're going to go to town early, stay the night in a hotel, and we're going to be there for that Monday evening event. So all of this to say, there is so much room for us to make a difference. And when I look around and I in fact, I stood on the lawn looking at this and I thought, I want to elect a governor who wants to be here. Because to have a state that is hurting and the governor, attorney general can't even show up, what does that say to law enforcement? Really, they're not a priority.
Yeah, and right now, I'm not giving my opinion, but I think our governor she wants to be in the White House right now. I think she doesn't
you would
admit
think
that.
she'd really want to be there.
Yeah. So if someone is watching and wants to, they don't know how to get involved, can they go to your website? Is that a good start? Your website?
Yeah, that's a great start.
Okay, let me put it up again on the screen so they can. Is there like a news? They can sign up here.
Yep, they can sign up. There's free downloads. They can go to Facebook where we are sharing like positive stories of things that we see happen around the state. Because I think that's one of the things, right? Is like, let's elevate the good. And so we also have, which Dave, I'll make sure to get you added to this, but we have a private Facebook group that has over 3,000 members. We would love to we really are a volunteer entity. So if you have individuals that they're like, Amy, we would love to be, we're looking for advisory board members. We're looking for board members. I cannot express it enough that I think this is has untapped potential. That
right here, I see where it's, and this is important, email list. So you can sign up in that way. If someone doesn't know what to do or how to help, you can blast out an email asking for people. So I'm going to put this website out there as well, because I think there's people, and people might want to get involved in different levels. People might want to do something little or something big. You would just want anyone get involved any way you can.
Well, and honestly too, one of the things we've been talking about is this is not So this is not about Police Week Michigan. This is about us supporting law enforcement. And so what I welcome knowing too is who are the other groups doing stuff? Like, let's connect. So we're going to try to do like a meeting of some of us that are working on stuff. Let's right hand talk to the left hand. But also, like, even we sent out an email yesterday with the tragedy of Detective Reckling and all the ways people could help. Like, here's where you can send a card for the family. Here's where you can donate. You know, I can make sure to get you that link as well. So we're just trying to do our part as citizens. We're grateful. And we welcome the involvement, and we just say, there's too much good going. There are too many good men and women in law enforcement for us to give up on them. And I think the last thing I would contribute is just to say that, just to encourage your listeners, the smallest thing means so much to these officers that even just, you know, I had a former officer tell me once, he's like, I can buy my own coffee, but he said to have somebody come up and shake my hand and say, thank you for what you do, that means so much.
Yeah.
So never underestimate the little thing, because it really does remind them they're not alone.
And it's not little. I'm going to bring it up, and I hate to do this, but the where is it here on the screen? Michigan State Police just posted about what's happening in Hillsdale. They said state police on the scene of an officer-involved shooting, Hillsdale County. The deputy has been transported to the hospital. Suspect is not in custody. Several law enforcement agencies are investigating. So prayers going out to whoever the deputy is. But
thank you for sharing that.
It's sad. Just now, today, as I'm talking to you, yet again,
I know
this has happened.
I know. Well, you should tell your listeners, you and I arranged to do this conversation like 3 days ago or something. And so exactly. I had just gotten a friend of mine actually on my way to do this interview with you. And I had a friend of mine was like, I've heard about a shooting in Hillsdale. And so I told you, and so we were investigating before we got online. This would be a scenario. I mean, let's talk about this really quick, right? So Hillsdale County is southern Michigan. It's very rural. They have a sheriff's department, but they do not have nighttime patrol. And I'm sure it's because they don't have the money. Wow. So this is where state police gets involved in the nighttime. But as your listeners start to watch this, and we'll start posting, there will become links available where people can donate. But if people are like, okay, because this is, I will say this is one of the positives. And this is how you know there's hope too, is when the tragedy happens to see the response from people. The response for Oakland County has been profound. But I think what we have to do is use these tragic moments and say, how do we make the future? It sounds sappy, but how do we make the future better? And so I would encourage your listeners, yes, be praying for this, but definitely follow us along on Facebook, Twitter. We'll try to keep people posted as well. And this is going to be an opportunity for us really to rally to, if people, I don't care if people live in the UP watching this and they're like, we're not by Hillsdale, what can we do? You know what? Use this as a reminder to reach out to your local law enforcement and say, what is it you guys need? I'm not kidding, Dave. Like, when they call their local law enforcement, they may find like they don't have a K-9 unit, but if they could get a donor to write a check, they could get a K-9 unit. They may not have updated vest for their department, but if they could get a local business saying, we will sponsor vest for your police department so you guys are up to date, that means so much to them. And it really is. It's really ultimately serving us too.
Have the involvement, before something like this, or use this and realize people need to get involved. And we'll keep an eye on that. I will put out your link. I'll have you on again.
Thank you, Dave. It's so fun to meet you. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. And I'll meet you in person when I head out your way at some point.
I love it.
Okay.
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Okay. You too.